Alien Baron gave him his paralyzed daughter as a joke, but he saw her true potential. The cold, sterile halls of the Vathari Palace stretched endlessly before Xander Kane as he walked, his boots echoing against the metal floors. The year was 2467, and Earth had come a long way since the first encounter with alien species. Humans had made allies and enemies across the stars, but no one was quite like the Vathari. They were powerful, cunning, and had a reputation for cruelty. Yet even among the Vathari, one figure stood out: Baron Zithar, a man whose wealth, power, and ambition knew no bounds. Xander, a decorated war hero turned scientist, had been summoned to this grand, alien stronghold under the guise of diplomacy. He had barely settled into his quarters when he was told to meet Baron Zithar in his private chambers. The Baron was waiting for him, lounging in an oversized chair, sipping from a goblet filled with an unknown liquid. His eyes gleamed with a playful yet dangerous gleam. He was tall, with sharp features and a skin tone that shifted with the light, a chameleon of sorts, a sign of his family's ability to adapt to any environment. "Ah, Xander Kane, the human hero," Zithar said with a smirk. "Come, sit. I have something for you." Xander raised an eyebrow. The Baron was known for his strange sense of humor, but Xander was no fool. He didn't trust the Vathari, especially Zithar. Still, he sat across from the Baron, his eyes never leaving him. "Something for me?" Xander asked cautiously. Zithar nodded, and with a flick of his hand, the doors to his chamber opened. Two guards entered, one holding a tall, silver box with strange symbols carved into it. They placed the box on the floor before Xander, and as they opened it, Xander's eyes widened in confusion. Inside was Zyra, a young woman lying motionless on a cushion, her body seemingly paralyzed. Her face was beautiful, with pale skin and sharp features, but there was no sign of life in her eyes. Her hands rested limply by her sides and her chest rose and fell slowly, but there was no movement, no expression of will. "She's yours now," Zithar said, his tone casual. "A gift, of course." Xander's mind raced. "What is this? What do you mean she's mine?" Zithar leaned back, his eyes glinting. "She's my daughter, Zyra. She was once my most prized possession, full of potential, but as you can see, she's no longer the same. A little accident, you see," he chuckled darkly. "Now she's just a shell." "A perfect joke, wouldn't you agree?" Xander felt a surge of anger but kept it hidden. The Vathari were known for their twisted sense of humor, but this was beyond cruelty. He had no interest in taking in some paralyzed woman just because the Baron found it amusing. "What do you expect me to do with her?" Xander asked, keeping his voice steady. Zithar's grin grew wider. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. Take her back to Earth. Teach her what you humans can. It should be an interesting experiment." Xander felt a knot form in his stomach. This was no ordinary gift. Zyra had been left like this intentionally, a living reminder of how powerless she had become. The Baron, in his arrogance, thought this was an amusing display of dominance over both humanity and his daughter. But Xander, with his deep understanding of alien technology and biology, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Zyra than met the eye. "Why would I want her?" Xander asked. "What am I supposed to do with someone who can't move, can't speak, can't do anything?" Zithar's gaze turned cold, his smile dropping. "Because you might find it interesting, Kane. You might just find something that could change the way you think about your kind. After all, humanity is weak, isn't it? Let's see how well you can handle a burden like her." Xander stood in silence, looking at Zyra. There was something in her eyes, something faint but there. It wasn't just emptiness. There was intelligence there, a sharpness that spoke volumes despite her immobile body. "Take her," Zithar said dismissively, waving his hand. "If you refuse, I'll have her discarded. It would be a shame, wouldn't it?" Xander's jaw tightened. Despite his better judgment, he knew he couldn't leave her behind, not when there was something so clearly strange about the situation. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't let Zithar win. "Fine," Xander said, his voice firm. "I'll take her, but I'm not doing this as a favor to you. I'll figure out what's going on here." Zithar's grin returned, wide and knowing. "Of course. That's exactly what I expect from you, Kane. But be warned, you may not like what you find." Xander didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the door and motioned for the guards to follow him, Zyra in tow. As they exited the palace, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something that might not only change the fate of Zyra, but of humanity itself. Once back on his ship, the Harbinger, Xander took Zyra to the medical bay. He couldn't help but wonder what the Baron had meant by her accident. There had to be more to her condition than just physical paralysis. As Xander carefully examined her, he couldn't help but notice the subtle movements in her eyes. They weren't just following his every motion. They were watching him, studying him, reacting to his actions. A strange thought crossed his mind. What if she wasn't just some helpless, broken thing? What if there was more to her than he realized? Xander ran a few preliminary scans and was surprised by the results. Zyra's neural activity was off the charts. Despite her paralysis, her brain was more active than the average human's, far more active. There were patterns of thought, even though she couldn't physically express them. Was this some kind of alien technology? Some way to control her, to keep her mind intact while disabling her body? He spent the next few hours conducting more tests, learning everything he could about her condition. And the more he discovered, the more questions arose. The paralysis was indeed artificial, but it wasn't a simple injury. Someone had tampered with her nervous system, locking her in a prison of her own body. Zyra wasn't just a victim, she was a prisoner. As Xander sat in the lab, his mind racing with possibilities, Zyra's eyes shifted. He was sure of it now. There was awareness in her gaze. She wasn't simply staring blankly into space, she was listening. "Can you hear me?" Xander asked softly, his voice unsure. For a long moment there was no response. Then, almost imperceptibly, Zyra's fingers twitched. Xander's heart skipped a beat. She's awake. She's aware. But what could she do? What did it mean? And why was she so important to Zithar? He knew one thing for sure, this was far from over. Zyra wasn't just a cruel joke. She was something far greater, something that could change everything. And Xander Kane was going to find out exactly what. The days following Xander's discovery of Zyra's unusual condition were filled with questions and uncertainties. Every time he glanced at her, lying motionless in her cot, a thought gnawed at him. What was really going on? Zyra, the daughter of the Vathari Baron, seemed like nothing more than a cruel joke, paralyzed, incapable of movement or speech. Yet, the longer Xander studied her, the more he realized that there was something deeply unusual about her. She wasn't just the lifeless thing Zithar had made her out to be. No, Zyra's mind was still very much alive, and more importantly, it was powerful. Xander spent his days trying to understand the device that had paralyzed her body. In the laboratory aboard his ship, the Harbinger, he had gathered every resource he could find to try and break the strange, alien technology that controlled Zyra. Her mind was clearly sharp. Every scan he ran confirmed that. Her neural activity was far higher than normal for any species, let alone a human. Something was terribly wrong. But as the hours passed, Xander's feelings of frustration were replaced with a creeping sense of awe. Zyra's eyes had begun to move in response to his actions, and her fingers twitched, as if trying to communicate. The longer Xander spent with her, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a woman who had been betrayed by her father. This was a prisoner of some kind. A prisoner of an alien force, trapped within her own body. That evening, Xander was reviewing more data when he noticed something strange. A ripple, almost like a wave, passed across Zyra's face. Her eyes focused on the screen in front of her. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Xander to pause and study her more closely. "Zyra," Xander said, his voice tentative, "can you understand me?" There was no answer, of course, but the way her eyes darted to the screen was unmistakable. She was following his movements. She was aware. Xander leaned forward, excitement rising in his chest. "If you can hear me, blink once," he said. It felt silly, but he had to try. At first, there was no response. Xander's heart sank a little. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe this was all just wishful thinking. Then, without warning, Zyra's right eyelid fluttered. Xander's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer. "Zyra, do you understand what I'm saying?" The faintest movement. Another blink. His excitement grew. Zyra wasn't just a passive, paralyzed being. She was aware, fully conscious, and, despite her lack of control over her body, still trying to communicate. Her mind was intact. There was so much potential here. He could feel the pieces coming together. The Vathari had clearly underestimated her, assuming she was a shell of a person. But Xander knew better now. Zyra was more than they thought. She had been trapped, not by her body, but by technology, and it was a prison that Xander was determined to break her out of. Days turned into weeks as Xander worked tirelessly, modifying equipment, using the knowledge he had gained from his time fighting the Vathari, and applying it to Zyra's condition. The neural inhibitors that kept her body paralyzed were advanced, no doubt about it. They had been specifically designed to keep her mind intact while rendering her physically helpless. But there was something wrong with them, something that even the Vathari hadn't fully accounted for. One night, as Xander prepared a new set of tests to measure her brain activity, he spoke to her softly. "I don't know who you are, Zyra, but I know you're not the helpless thing they think you are. There's something in you, something powerful, and I'm going to help you." Zyra's eyes flickered at his words as though she understood the weight of them. Then a strange thing happened. A low hum filled the room, the sound coming from deep within her body. Xander froze, staring at the readout on his console. Her neural activity was spiking. The hum grew louder, more intense. The very air in the room seemed to vibrate. For the first time since she had been placed under his care, Zyra's fingers moved, not just a twitch, but a deliberate motion. Her hand curled into a fist. And then, as if the air around her was alive, she opened her mouth. A sound, faint and soft, escaped. Xander rushed to her side. "Zyra, did you just speak?" There was no answer, but the hum continued, rising and falling like a symphony of hidden power. Xander had seen nothing like it before. The technology keeping her still wasn't just a simple device. No, it was far more advanced than anything he had imagined. He grabbed a data pad and began running more complex scans. The results were astonishing. Zyra's neural pathways were more active than any humans, or even any alien species Xander had encountered. She wasn't just reacting to stimuli, she was controlling them. Her mind was sending signals, bending the very technology that had imprisoned her to her will. Xander's hands shook with excitement. She wasn't paralyzed at all. Zyra had the ability to manipulate the neural inhibitors that had been placed within her. She had power, and it was clear now that she had been holding back. But why? "Zyra," Xander said, his voice filled with wonder, "I know you're in there, you have power. What happened to you?" For a moment, there was nothing. The hum had stopped and her eyes were locked onto his. Then slowly her lips parted. This time the sound was clearer. "Help me," she whispered. Xander's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm everything he had suspected. Zyra had been trapped, but she wasn't powerless. She had been locked inside her own mind, forced to endure the technology that her father had used to imprison her. And now, it seemed, she was ready to break free. The next few days were a blur of activity. Xander worked tirelessly to decode the neural inhibitors, finding ways to bypass the technology that kept Zyra from controlling her own body. Each night, Zyra's power seemed to grow. Her ability to control the machines around her became more evident. The data he gathered from her brain patterns was like a road map to a hidden power he hadn't even realized existed. Xander couldn't help but marvel at her. Zyra had been dealt a cruel hand, but she was more than just a victim. She had a power that no one had truly recognized, and now, with Xander's help, she was beginning to reclaim it. One evening, as Xander was running another series of tests, something unexpected happened. Zyra's body suddenly jerked upright, the stiff muscles of her arms and legs seeming to loosen. Her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since he'd met her, Xander saw a spark of defiance there. She was ready to fight back. "Zyra," Xander breathed, his voice filled with awe, "you can do it." Her fingers twitched again, then curled into a fist. She took a deep breath and for the first time spoke louder. "I can take control. I can be free." Xander couldn't believe it. The very technology that had held her captive was now in her hands. She wasn't just aware, she was ready to act. "Then let's do it," Xander said with a grin, as Zyra's power continued to grow, both terrifying and magnificent. The real fight was just beginning. The tension in the air aboard the Harbinger was thick with anticipation. Zyra had made remarkable progress in the last few weeks. Every day, it seemed, she grew stronger, more in control of her body and her mind. What had once been a faint flicker of awareness had now blossomed into something much more powerful. Zyra was no longer just a prisoner of her father's cruel technology. She was becoming something else, something far more dangerous. Xander Kane, once a soldier and now a scientist, had seen many battles in his life, but nothing prepared him for what he was witnessing. Zyra, the daughter of the ruthless Vathari Baron, had begun to harness her own strength. She was no longer just reacting to the world around her. She was shaping it, bending the technology that had once enslaved her to her will. She had become an ally, and perhaps, Xander thought, something more. He had come to respect her, not only for her intelligence but for her incredible resilience. Zyra wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting for something bigger: freedom, justice, and perhaps revenge on the father who had trapped her in this way. The power she now held was extraordinary. She could manipulate the machines on the ship with only her mind, sending signals to control anything from the lights to the ship's engines. She could access data systems with ease, something that even the most skilled hackers would struggle with. And yet, despite all this power, there was still one thing she had yet to do: break free from the technology that had kept her immobile for so long. Xander knew that they couldn't stay in hiding forever. Baron Zithar, Zyra's father, was powerful. He had vast resources, and if he realized that Zyra had escaped his control, he would stop at nothing to bring her back. Xander had already learned that the Baron had spies everywhere, and the moment he found out Zyra was no longer under his watchful eye, there would be hell to pay. One evening, as Xander and Zyra sat together in the ship's observation deck, watching the stars outside, Zyra spoke, her voice low but firm. "We can't stay hidden forever." Xander glanced at her, studying her face. Her eyes, though still quiet, held a fire in them now. There was a determination in her expression that hadn't been there before. She was ready to act. "I know," Xander replied. "We need to find a way to confront him, but he's not just a baron. He's the leader of the Vathari Dominion. If we attack him directly, we could start a war." Zyra looked down for a moment, her mind clearly racing. "If he finds us, it won't matter how peaceful we want to be. He'll come for me. He'll come for both of us." Xander could see the weight of her words. Zithar was dangerous, but Zyra was right. If they didn't act soon, they would lose the element of surprise. The Baron had already shown how far he was willing to go to control his daughter, and now that she was free, there was no telling what lengths he would take to get her back. "What do you suggest?" Xander asked, his voice quiet. Zyra met his gaze with a cool, calculating stare. "I need to get to the heart of his empire. I need to go to Vathar Prime." Xander's eyes widened. Vathar Prime was the capital of the Vathari Dominion, a massive planet known for its sprawling cities and heavily fortified military presence. It was also the center of the Baron's power, a place where he held all the cards. If Zyra was going to confront her father, that was the place to do it, but it was also the most dangerous place in the galaxy. "You're sure about this?" Xander asked, a note of concern in his voice. "That's where he's at his strongest." "We'd be walking straight into the lion's den," Zyra nodded. "That's why we need to move quickly. We need to strike before he even knows what's happening." Xander ran a hand through his hair. It was a risky plan, too risky. But as he looked at Zyra, he realized that she wasn't asking for his permission. She was already determined to go. The question wasn't if they would go to Vathar Prime, it was how they would get there and survive. They spent the next few days preparing. Xander gathered what little intel he could on Vathar Prime's defenses, while Zyra worked on refining her abilities. She had grown incredibly skilled at manipulating technology. She had hacked into the Vathari databases and learned everything she could about her father's inner circle, about his military strategy, and about the technology that had kept her prisoner for so long. There were still parts of her father's empire that even she couldn't access, but Zyra was patient. She would get to them. In the meantime, Xander knew they needed to assemble a team. They couldn't do this alone. If they were going to fight the Vathari, they needed allies. As luck would have it, the crew of the Harbinger wasn't exactly lacking in experience. Xander's old military contacts had come through, and several former soldiers had joined the crew over the past few months. They had all heard about the Vathari's oppression and were ready to fight back, but Xander knew that they were vastly outnumbered. It wouldn't be enough to just have fighters on their side. They needed a plan. They needed an edge. The night before they were scheduled to leave, Xander found Zyra standing alone in the ship's control room, staring out at the stars. She seemed calm, but Xander could sense the tension in her. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice soft. Zyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I've been ready for a long time." Xander nodded, respecting her determination. "We'll make it. We'll get to Vathar Prime, take down your father, and free the galaxy from his control." Zyra smiled, though it was a tight, controlled smile. "If anyone can make it happen, it's us." For the first time since he had met her, Xander saw the full scope of her potential. She wasn't just some victim of her father's cruelty. She was a force in her own right, an unstoppable force. And together, they would stand against the tyranny of the Vathari. The next morning, the Harbinger broke through the atmosphere of the nearest moon and jumped into hyperspace, heading toward Vathar Prime. The journey would take several days, and in that time, Zyra prepared herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. Xander and the crew worked tirelessly to ensure the ship was ready for whatever lay ahead. They would need every advantage they could get. As the ship hurtled through the stars, Zyra sat in her quarters, focused. She was no longer the helpless, paralyzed woman she had been when Xander first found her. She had a power now, one that could change the fate of the galaxy. And she would use it, not just to defeat her father, but to bring freedom to countless others who had suffered under the Vathari's reign. Xander looked out at the stars, a sense of calm determination settling over him. He had seen war before, but this felt different. This time, they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater. And as the Harbinger sped toward its destination, both Xander and Zyra knew that their greatest battle was yet to come. The journey to Vathar Prime had taken several days, but in the quiet of the ship, the tension between Xander and Zyra had been growing. The closer they came to their destination, the more the weight of their mission settled on their shoulders. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. Xander stood at the bridge of the Harbinger, staring at the vast expanse of stars ahead. He knew the battle to come would be unlike anything they had faced before. The Vathari were powerful, and Baron Zithar, the man who had once ruled the galaxy with cruelty, was more dangerous than ever. Zyra's father was a ruthless leader, but Xander had no doubt. This fight wasn't just about saving Zyra. It was about stopping a reign of terror that had lasted far too long. "Zyra," Xander said softly, turning from the view of the stars to the woman standing by the control panel, her eyes fixed on the same vastness ahead. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Zyra's expression was unreadable, but there was no hesitation in her voice when she spoke. "I've been ready for years, Xander. This is my fight. It always has been." Xander nodded, understanding. Zyra had been trapped by her father's technology, forced to live as a prisoner in her own body. But now she was free, and her power was undeniable. The same intelligence that had once been her strength, now amplified by her new abilities, was a force that could change everything. But as much as Zyra had grown, the upcoming confrontation would be a test of everything they had worked for. "The crew is ready," Xander said. "We've made the necessary adjustments to the ship systems and the weapons are online. We'll get through this, Zyra, together." Zyra's gaze softened for a moment. "Together," she repeated, the word almost like a promise. She turned her focus back to the control panel, her fingers lightly tapping on the interface as if already preparing for the battle ahead. When they finally arrived in the orbit of Vathar Prime, the sheer scale of the planet left even Xander in awe. The capital was a sprawling metropolis surrounded by massive defense grids. Baron Zithar's stronghold, the Vathari Citadel, stood tall in the heart of the planet, a towering structure of steel and stone that seemed almost indestructible. The Vathari fleet was anchored around the planet, a reminder of just how dangerous this mission was. "This is it," Xander said, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of the situation. "We'll need to get in and out quickly. No matter what happens, our priority is to bring down Zithar." Zyra stood tall beside him, her expression focused. "If we don't stop him now, he'll just keep spreading his influence. It's not just me he controls, it's everyone who's ever been oppressed by him. This ends today." With the crew in place and their plan set, the Harbinger began its descent toward Vathar Prime. They had carefully calculated their route, avoiding detection by the Vathari's radar systems as much as possible. But the closer they got to the Citadel, the harder it would be to remain undetected. "Prepare for anything," Xander said to the crew. "This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. This is a fight for the galaxy." As the ship touched down on the outskirts of the Citadel, the crew gathered in the main hall. The air was thick with anticipation. Zyra's mind was racing. She could feel the hum of the technology around her, the networks that controlled everything from the city's power to its defense systems. She could manipulate it all. She was ready. "I'll lead the way," Zyra said, her voice steady and commanding. "I know the systems inside the Citadel. I'll get us past the first line of defense." Xander looked at her, proud but concerned. "Be careful, we're not just facing soldiers. Zithar has personal guards who are more than human." "I'm ready," Zyra replied with a firm nod. The crew followed her lead as they made their way through the shadowed streets of the Citadel's outer limits. They moved swiftly, blending into the darkness, avoiding the Vathari patrols that roamed the city. Zyra, with her enhanced abilities, controlled the ship systems remotely, ensuring that their movements were masked from any surveillance. They reached the gates of the Citadel without being detected. But as they approached the grand entrance, a feeling of dread washed over Xander. They were walking into the lion's den. "We need to act fast," Zyra said, her voice tight. "Once we enter, we won't have much time before Zithar's guards are alerted." The massive doors of the Citadel slowly opened with a heavy groan, revealing a vast hall lined with statues of ancient Vathari leaders. The place reeked of power, Zithar's power. As they ventured deeper into the Citadel, the walls seemed to pulse with the energy of the technology Zyra had once been trapped by. But now, it was hers to control. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the harsh sound of footsteps. A squad of Vathari shock troops rounded the corner, their heavy armor clanking as they marched forward, weapons at the ready. "Get ready," Xander whispered, signaling the crew to spread out. Before the soldiers could raise their weapons, Zyra's eyes glowed with intensity. With a simple thought, she hacked into the Citadel's systems and sent an electrical surge through the area. The soldiers staggered, their systems short-circuiting, leaving them incapacitated. "They won't be out for long," Zyra warned. "We need to keep moving." The crew pressed forward, following her lead as she disabled more security measures and bypassed the barriers that would have stopped them at every turn. It was almost too easy now. Zyra's power was undeniable, and with every step, the Citadel seemed to bend to her will. They reached the central chamber, a massive room with a throne-like seat at its far end. Baron Zithar sat there, his cold eyes fixed on the group. His presence was overwhelming, a force of nature. "Well, well," he said, his voice oozing with arrogance. "I see my daughter has finally decided to stop playing pretend. I must admit I'm impressed. You've done well, Zyra, but this is where your little rebellion ends." Zyra stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "You've held me captive long enough, father. This ends today." Zithar's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you can defeat me after all I've done? You're nothing but a broken tool, Zyra. You were never meant to be more than an ornament." Zyra's hands clenched into fists. "You were wrong. I was never your tool. I was always more than you could understand." With a flick of her wrist, she sent a surge of energy toward the systems in the room. The lights flickered, and the walls shook as her power took control of the entire citadel. Zithar rose from his throne, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've won? I control everything here. I am the Vathari Dominion." But Zyra was no longer the prisoner he had once controlled. With one final burst of power, she tore through the systems, disabling Zithar's defenses and stripping him of his control over the citadel. "You don't control anything anymore," Zyra said, her voice steady and full of resolve. With that, Xander and the crew moved in, taking down the remaining guards as Zyra confronted her father. It was a final, decisive moment. Zithar, defeated and powerless, fell to his knees. "You lost," Zyra whispered, her voice cold. "And now I'm free." The Vathari Dominion would never be the same. As the crew stood victorious, the citadel fell silent. Zyra had done it. She had taken back her life and with it had ended her father's reign of terror. Together, with Xander at her side, she had not only defeated her father but had opened the door to a new era of freedom for the galaxy.